Alexander, how are you doing? Back in London.
Back in London, feeling fit, well, and extremely pleased back in London after a great walking holiday in the Lake District of England, almost deserted, by the way, due to our pandemic problems. But so I had it to myself. Not good for the people, of course, who service the hotels and the places there, but all the same, it was great. It was a wonderful time.
All right. It's been a while since we've done a live. Hello to everybody. Hello, Kyrgyzstan. All right, cool.
Oh, wow.
Valley S opens it up with a $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Valley S, for that super chat. And boy, it has been a couple of weeks. Got a lot of news to discuss. We'll take questions from the live stream. We'll take super chats. We always appreciate the questions. We appreciate the likes, the super chats, the donations, the purchases at the Duran shop. Alexander, I'm wearing my new Duran USA hat.
It looks fantastic. It looks great. You must get me one too.
Great fit. It is a great fit, and I'm in a Napa. I'm in a Napa right now, and I'm doing some videos walking around. Yeah. Boy, the tourist season is just obliterated. There's no one. The UK is closed off. Yeah. Russia, that tourism is going to dry up too. I mean, it's just bad, really bad. I'll put up the video so everyone can see them soon. I don't know how people are going to get by, but I think the tourism industry is going to change a lot. Alexander, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I agree. I completely agree. I mean, I experienced the same thing in the Lake District in England. It was astonishing to see how quiet it was after, you'd expect at this time of year lots of people to be there, but there just aren't. And it's going to be a tremendous culling, I think, of tourist sites and hotels and places. But we'll see what survives and what comes through. And I agree, tourism will change. Yeah. The other thing I'm reading about, I mean, the whole hospitality and entertainment business in Britain is just falling apart, apparently. And I hadn't realized it because obviously it's a long time since I ever did that sort of thing, which I never did very much. But the club scene in Britain has just ended. I mean, there haven't been any clubs going now for a year or so, and apparently a fifth of them have closed. And that's before the real debt wave now crashes in, which it will apparently later this month. So it's likely all that side of things, which we've become so used to, is going to end. It's amazing.
It really is amazing. Alan Watson, good to have you here. Hey, Ian in Massachusetts. Karen with €20 super chat. Thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it. Let's see where else. ZC, Kalispera, how are you? Let me go through. Hello to everybody in Australia. Boy, Australia is more lockdowns, Alexander.
Absolutely,
I mean, it's just beyond crazy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, very ferocious ones, and just about 5 people turn up ill, and the whole city's closed down. They are copying the Chinese approach, but of course they don't have the control that China has. They can't control their borders in the way that China has, and they don't have the vastness that China does. So they're reproducing a system that, whatever view you have of it, the Chinese could make it work. But can it really work in Australia?
I don't know. Hello, Miguel, Puerto Rico. How you doing? Alexander in Serbia. Good to have you here. Denmark is in the house. Richie from Glasgow in the house. All right. Let's I think we have a super chat question here to kick it off from Rafael. Salut a tutte et a tu. I love you guys. I love the show. Yo te quiero mucho, mi amigos y amigas. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for that super chat. Good evening. Love from China. How's everyone doing in China, in Birmingham, England? All right, guys, just let's keep it open. We'll go for about an hour and a half. Let us know what you guys want to talk about, any questions that you have. A lot of news going on. There's news about Trump. There's news from Putin's Q&A. We got the 4th of July 3-day weekend in the United States coming up. Nigel, good to have you here. Yes, there's the new platform, GETTR, Getter, and it's coming from the Trump, Jason Miller, the Trump aide. He launched another free speech social platform, but it's like in a closed beta, Alexander. And once again, it's to take on Twitter and all of that stuff. There's been a lot of court cases too, Alexander. With
there have been lots. There've been lots.
A lot of stuff going on. I'm illegal. How do you see things going on there?
Well, I'm going to say this. I think there's been. I mean, at the moment, we're very much in first instance courts. That's to say, trial courts. And what you find is that you get lots of judges. Many of them are Clinton, Obama appointments, and they're siding with the Silicon Valley giants. People should not be too, deflated by that. Ultimately, the really big decisions are going to be made if and when these big court cases reach the Supreme Court. And the arguments that have been made by some of the lawyers involved in these cases have been extremely interesting. And also some of the judgments, in my opinion, have been extremely interesting. There was a fascinating one made, I think, in Florida, in which the district judge in that case, and I don't think it was against Facebook, I think it was Google, but I'm not sure. But he talked about, the need for the platform, the internet giant, to exercise editorial judgment. I mean, this had to be protected, apparently. Well, of course, editorial judgments are things that publishers do, not platforms, supposedly. But that's what the judge said. Now, it seems to me you can pick that up and run with it. And if you take it all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, which I think eventually somebody will, then, as I said, you have all kinds of interesting possibilities coming up from all of this. So we're at a very early stage. As I've said many times in previous iterations of court cases, legal time is slow. And this is a thing that's very difficult for people to understand, I think. Sometimes they expect you go to the court, the judge is it's an open and shut case, or so it seems. You expect the judge to decide it in your favor, and it doesn't work out that way. What actually you need to do is you need to go step by step. It's a grinding process, but eventually, based on what I'm seeing, based on the legal arguments I'm seeing, I think this is going in a very interesting direction. And give it two years, we could have some very interesting decisions, and decisions which could change the entire situation completely and radically coming on stream. So I'm actually moderately hopeful about this.
All right, let's open it up with a question from Raphael. My question is: I believe the U.S. are abandoning all these military bases, not by choice, but because they are told to leave by China and Russia.
Well, which Chinese bases, which US bases did you have in mind, Raphael? You mean Afghanistan? As far as I can see, the US is trying. Some people in the US want to pull out of Afghanistan. Other people are still trying to keep it there. And there's all kinds of complicated things going on. In the Middle East, I don't see any sign of a retreat at all. I see, on the contrary, at this moment in time, reversing decisions that seemed to have been made a few weeks ago, the US digging in again. So I don't really see much sign of the US giving up bases at the moment. I see, on the contrary, the US actually at the moment trying to go on the offensive again. And we've just had this major exercise in the Black Sea, which has aggravated the Russians immensely, by the way. And of course, we've had very harsh words from Xi Jinping about the Taiwan Strait and all that. So I don't actually see the US pulling back from any bases. And I certainly don't think they're doing it because the Chinese and the Russians are telling them to. Quite the opposite. At the moment, I get the impression that they're actually pushing back hard. So there we go.
All right. GEC 812 moderating as well. How are you doing? How are things in Australia? To our great moderators, thank you guys for helping us out. And you're doing an awesome job. We really appreciate it. Robert says, is the Peru election being fiddled? The Peru election.
Well, right. I haven't. Again, it's Peru is another country. I gather that there's been a very, very narrow win by a socialist candidate. And I understand that this has been contested. Now, I can't tell you whether or not it's been fiddled. I know it's been contested. That's all I can say. All I will make, the only observation I can make about it is this, and it's a point which I know many people have made, which is that neither of these particular candidates was particularly popular. They were both in the first round polling in the sort of 11-12% range. And there was, as in happens in many elections, a sort of process of elimination. And only these two somewhat unpopular figures were left. And that does seem strange. Now, I want to say that I can only say that it's strange. I can't say it's been manipulated or fiddled because I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, given how things work now. But Peru, I would say, is again a very interesting country, very divided country in some ways. You have people, apparently the indigenous communities who live in the Andes, being pitted against the people who live in the cities along the coast, and it's had histories of breakdowns and civil wars. It had a horrific insurgency, as I well remember, with the Shining Path, the Sendero Luminoso group, back, I think it was the 80s. So, I mean, let's hope that things, if there were electoral malpractices, that things remain somewhat on track. And again, we don't see a return to that kind of violence, which is, I think, always possible in South America.
Yeah. Simone wants to know, what do you think about Ethiopia in the Tigray region? U.S. said it maybe will intervene. I've done a video on this, and things are heating up. Actually, I think in Tigray there was a lot of conflict going on there, and I believe what's the group, Alexander, that took it over? I believe they gained ground against the Ethiopian government.
The Tigray Liberation.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, which, by the way, as I understand it, is not a breakaway group from Ethiopia as such. It's that there is a struggle between them and the present faction, if you like, which is empowering Ethiopia in Addis Ababa for ultimate control of the country. So it's, in a sense, it's a civil war, not so much a secessionist war, or at least that's my understanding of it. But of course, that may not be complete. I do hope that the United States doesn't intervene. I think if the US to intervene in Ethiopia now, I mean, these interventions don't really end well. Now, somewhere or other, there has to be some kind of, I presume, settlement of the conflict. But the thing to say about Ethiopia is that it's been unstable and it's been plagued by violence for all of its modern history. As far as I can remember, there have been wars in Ethiopia extending well back to the fall of the emperor in the 1970s. And of course, when Haile Selassie was the emperor of Ethiopia, there was already also a war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which Ethiopia for a time controlled. So it's a country that's never really settled down. And I think what needs to happen in Ethiopia is for the Ethiopians themselves to sort out and stabilize their political institutions and achieve a kind of stability between each other, at which point the great resources of the country, which are very real, will start to come into play, and you will see the country grow very rapidly, which for a time it was doing. But certainly wouldn't want to see the United States intervene. I don't think the United States knows enough about this conflict, and I don't think it knows how to sort of arbitrate and decide and mediate between them. What I hope these people will do, people in Tigray and people in Addis Ababa, is they'll sit down and speak to each other when hopefully the government in Addis Ababa realizes that it can't defeat the people in Tigray, and the people in Tigray realize that they can't take over the whole of Ethiopia. But anyway, that it seems to me is the best solution. It would be a mediation exercise, which the US isn't terribly good at, not, I hope, an intervention, which I think would be a disaster.
Yeah. Sean Wookie is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Sean. Rocky Lux. How credible were the claims by Professor Anthony C. Sutton that the Bolsheviks overthrow of Tsarist Russia and the first and second 5-year plans were financially backed by Wall Street bankers with the U.S. State Department? Wow, what a question.
What a vast question, an enormous question. I haven't read Professor Sutton's works. I mean, I took a very big interest in Russian and Soviet history when I was a student and a graduate student and thereafter. And I don't remember this being discussed at that time, because so much is now coming out of the Soviet archives and out of Wall Street and all sorts of places that it could be that people have revised these ideas. I'm going to make one general observation. The first thing to say is that in 1917, when the October Revolution took place, or rather, the Bolsheviks came to power in October 1917. They did so essentially in de facto alliance with Germany, or at least they sought peace with Germany. The United States at that time was at war with Germany, and the United States at that time did not recognize the Bolshevik takeover in Russia. Now, whether there were things going on behind the scenes between people in the United States and the Bolsheviks, I mean, I simply don't know. But at that point in time, there does seem to be a tension, to my mind, between the Bolsheviks being in league with the US and at the same time in alliance with Germany, which the United States, as I said, was at war with. And then through the 1920s, the Bolshevik government in Moscow was not recognized by the United States. I mean, it was only recognized when Franklin Roosevelt became president of the United States in 1933. But then there is no doubt at all that you have a period in the 1930s when relations between the United States and the Soviet Union and the Soviet government became extremely close. And the first 5-year plans were not so much, as far as I know, financed by the United States, but certainly lots of people, engineers, technicians, technologists, all kinds of people like that, went to Russia from the United States and played an absolutely key role in building up Soviet industries. So the Soviet truck industries, the car industries, the metallurgical industries, the iron and steel works in places like Magnitogorsk and the rest were built very much with the help of US engineers and US engineering know-how. Now, whether, again, all of this was underpinned by secret agreements, I just don't know. But there is no doubt that in the 30s, relations between the US and the Soviet Union actually became surprisingly close, much closer than they have ever been at any time since.
All right. Miss Texas is a new member to the drag community. Welcome, Miss Texas. Hugo says that Trotsky has been in America before the revolution started. He even got funded the equivalent of $10,000. And Jacob says, according to Sutton, Poland in September 1939 was attacked from both west and east by Wall Street.
Well, look, again, I have to, the fact that Trotsky was in the United States, that is, of course, indisputably true. I mean, he was definitely in the United States at the time of the revolution and the Tsar's abdication. What contacts he had with the U.S. government? I mean, it's a part of history. I simply don't know. I mean, I would obviously need to read about Professor Sutton's books to find out. What I will say is, again, in the power struggles that took place in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, Trotsky was the loser. I mean, he eventually lost out to Stalin. Now, what connections Stalin had with the US, again, during this period, I don't know. What I will say is that, to my knowledge, he was actually very, very interested in the US and was very keen on copying its technologies and its industrial systems and all that. So, again, perhaps there's more information that's come out than I am familiar with. It is a very long time, since I looked at all of this, and these are books that I would have to read about and learn about. And again, if this is a reference, if what we've just heard is a reference to the Russo-Polish War of 1920 to 21, that's again something. I mean, I don't know very much about the background of the war. If it's a reference to the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and what happened to Poland then. Well, I know a little bit more about that, but that's again a different time frame.
Yeah. All right. Let me go into the live stream and see what people are saying.
Yeah.
James, Russian air patrols need to stay away from the Alaskan airspace because they may start WW3.
Well, can I just say something? I agree, actually. I think this practice by both sides of conducting exercises close to each other's borders and in their territorial waters is a huge mistake and very destabilizing. We've just had this big NATO exercise in the Black Sea, which the Russians are very touchy and aggravated about. And I've done a program about this in my on my channel. And we've had a Russian naval exercise close to Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands. What are the Russians doing near the Hawaiian Islands? I mean, this thing is out of control. Now, I will say this. It seems to me that it's to some extent, in fact, to a great extent, it's been the US and NATO that have been pushing this thing. I mean, they expanded NATO eastward after the end of the Cold War, after promising the Russians they would never do that. They've established bases in the Baltic states, which again, they said they would never do. We've had naval exercises in the Black Sea, naval exercises in the Baltic. They've edged their weapons and their troops ever closer to Russia's borders. And of course, they were involved in the coup in Ukraine, and they backed the government in Georgia. All things which are very destabilizing and which explain the background to all of this. And the Russians, as I said, are now taking counter steps. But in my opinion, both sides need to draw back. I think it is as dangerous for the Russians to carry out exercises, close to Alaska or Hawaii, as it is for the Americans to, start conducting exercises in places like the Black Sea and the Baltic. The one thing I would say about Alaska is, of course, if you look at a map, Alaska and Russia are actually quite close. I mean, was it Sarah Palin who said once that she was absolutely able to see Russia? Not true, by the way, but apparently she said it. I mean, but physically they actually border each other. I mean, the Bering Strait separates the two, and it's not very wide. So it may be that the Russians would say that their exercises in and near Alaska are actually near to their own territory, but Russian exercises off Hawaii are just I just don't understand the logic of that at all.
Yeah. Zariel says, let's be honest, World War III will not be started just by a fighter or a ship. Putin made that very clear. However, a kinetic volley may happen very soon.
Well, indeed. And that would be very bad, because even if we don't get World War III, I mean, just imagine what the effect of that would be on the international situation. There would be a huge rise in tension. There would be even greater militarization. There would be enormous amount of anger, probably on both sides. There would be a further severing of economic links and a division of the world into armed camps. And of course, the effect on the financial markets, which are pretty precarious at any point in time, but perhaps especially so at the moment, at least in the short term, would be wild. So let's not, look forward to such a thing. Let's try to the extent that we can, to avoid it. And the Americans and the Russians are talking about, establishing a stability mechanism. And I think if that's going to have any meaning at all, it means pulling back from these kind of, as I said, extremely reckless exercises that are being done now.
All right. Sparky says, closing of nightclubs. Oh, where did it go? Oh, Sparky, I lost it. Here it is. Closing of nightclubs is a shame. Younger generations should concentrate more on becoming socialized instead of becoming socialist.
Well, I completely agree, actually.
That may be the point, though, to closing the nightclubs. Well, they don't socialize and they do become socialist.
It does. Well, I'm going to say straightforwardly. I mean, I think a lot of the events of last summer, all the protests and all that we got, I think a lot of young people joined them because, frankly, they're frustrated and full of energy and all that. And it's very easy in that kind of situation to play on people and to get them out protesting and doing all kinds of things. And I think that would play a part, especially perhaps not so much in the US, but certainly in Britain, because, you know, it was interesting that all that was going on at the very hardest period of lockdown here. But I think that absolutely, I mean, my wife is an academic. She teaches students, people, you know, 18 to 23-year-olds. And, you know, they're going through a miserable time. They're not able to socialize. They're not able to go, you know, to clubs and meet with each other and do the kind of things that young people want to do. They can't even meet together properly on the university campus. And this has put young people under tremendous pressure, and it's going to create all kinds of problems going forward. And it concerns me and everybody who's involved about the damage that it's doing. And of course, if it does make them politically active in certain ways, perhaps some people would want that. But, you know, always I say, when you do that kind of thing, be careful what you wish for, because it can always turn out in ways that you don't expect.
Yeah. Raphael says, G this week, quote, "We will bash the head." I lost that too. God, come on, YouTube. Yeah. 1 second, Raphael, let me find it. I was just reading it and bam, it disappeared. Here it is. Okay. G this week, quote, "We will bash the head bloody of anyone who tries to mess with China," end quote. Putin this week said, quote, "U.S. dominance is over." What do you make of these?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I just done a program for my own channel about Xi Jinping's speech. It was extremely strong speech. I mean, it was all very much about China reasserting itself, putting behind, you know, the century of humiliation that happened after the 1840s, you know, the period when it became almost a semi-colony of the Western powers, and now it's a strong country again, and it's not going to be messed around with, and people shouldn't mess around with China, and they shouldn't preach to China either. And that was a very, very strong speech. And he also made some very, very strong comments about Taiwan, and said to people, don't underestimate us about Taiwan. We will one day reestablish Chinese rule in Taiwan, and anybody who thinks we won't is, you know, doesn't understand us. And if they try to get in our way, well, they you know, they will have a fight on their hands. That was what it was. A very, very tough speech. And as you absolutely rightly said, and again, I've done another program about this on my channel, and we've done a similar program about this on the Duran. The Russians, for their part, have been speaking much more assertively now. Putin spoke much more assertively in his Q&A about the steps the Russians would take if, you know, the West crossed their red lines, interfered with them, engaged in provocations and all the rest. And we've seen that in Russian actions in the Black Sea with the British destroyer and the Dutch frigate and all the rest. So all of this is going on. And I think that the point about the unipolar moment being ended, and that the United States no longer be in a position where it can just sail its ships wherever it wants and fly its aircraft wherever it wants, and people don't respond. I think that those days are indeed over. But they do make it important again to establish proper control mechanisms so that everybody knows what they can do and what they cannot do. And that obviously applies to the United States. It also applies to the Chinese and the Russians also. I mean, they too have to understand that there are limits and constraints upon them too. Otherwise, there will at some point come a smash, and that, as I said, won't be good for anybody.
No. Neil O'Keefe says, footage just released of Queen Victoria statue being pulled down and destroyed in Canada. Your thoughts?
I actually heard that it was Queen Elizabeth II, in other words, our present Queen. If it's Queen Victoria, it will be less upsetting to people in Britain. If it's the present Queen, it will cause a lot of distress and upset. Well, I'm against statue toppling. If it's Queen Victoria, I think it's pointless, because she was the Queen of Canada, and it's a historical monument. And I certainly don't believe in taking down historical monuments. I think it's wrong, entirely wrong. If it's a question of Canada one day choosing to sever its link with Britain and becoming a republic, that is absolutely something for Canadians themselves to decide. That's up to them. I mean, I'm not, as a British person, going to preach, but I don't think that statue toppling helps that. If you want to make a political decision, make it. But as I said, gesture politics and virtue signaling and toppling statues and erasing part of your history, that is no good ever comes of that.
How much, my question, how much statue toppling took place when the Bolsheviks came to power? I know there was a lot of statues created, a lot of cult of personalities created in and around Marx and Lenin. That's for sure. You see it when you go to Russia, even today. So what was the amount of statue toppling when the Bolsheviks took over? And in the late 80s, early 90s, was there any statue toppling of the communist presence for 70 years? Were there Lenin or Stalin statues that were toppled? Once again, when you go to Moscow or St. Petersburg, you do, at least on my end, I do see a lot of the statues of Lenin and Stalin, and everything seems that it's preserved. But my question is, was there a lot of statue toppling?
Well,
after communism?
The answer is straight away. Absolutely, there was. There was a huge amount of it. In fact, if you go to Eisenstein's film October, which is made in the 10th anniversary of the October Revolution, a Soviet, big Soviet propaganda film, it actually starts with an image of a statue of a Tsar being toppled. So there was a huge amount of that going on. There were some statues of Tsars which were preserved, especially in St. Petersburg. So you'll find there a couple of some important statues of Peter the Great and of Catherine the Great. But generally speaking, an enormous amount of statue toppling took place. And if you talk about Moscow, which is, of course, the Soviet capital, I think it's fair to say that back in, at the time when the Soviet Union ended, you would not have found any statues of any Tsars anywhere in Moscow. I mean, they completely erased them. And the same was true of nearly everywhere else in Russia. Now, a number of statues of Tsars that were destroyed by the Bolsheviks or removed by the Bolsheviks have been brought back. There's a statue of Alexander III, who was one of the Tsars, which has been brought back in St. Petersburg, for example. And the Russian government has been taking steps to restore some of the old Tsarist monuments in the Alexander Garden near the Kremlin. But you are absolutely right. The very interesting thing is that in Russia, they made a decision, which is that they would not go about, after the Soviet Union fell, toppling statues of all the Soviet monuments. So you will go up and down Russia, you will find lots of statues of Lenin, of other Soviet leaders, not so much of Stalin. Believe it or not, it was the Soviets themselves who toppled most of Stalin's statues, because Khrushchev, after he succeeded Stalin, conducted an anti-Stalin campaign. But you will find lots of Soviet monuments all over Russia, and they are preserved, and many of them are actually looked after. And the reason that happens is not because the Russians maybe, they have a tremendous attachment to their communist past. It is because they see them as part of their history and as part of their historic memory. And in fact, when they do surveys in Russia, people say, we want to keep these statues as a memory, as a recollection of our history. It's part of our history. We don't want to see them go. And the interesting thing is the kind of people who want to preserve these statues are the same people who want, say, to build more churches. And you've seen lots of churches which were demolished, because the Bolsheviks also demolished many churches. They've been rebuilt, reconstructed.
Christ the Savior in Moscow.
Christ the Savior.
They tried to make it into a swimming pool, the Bolsheviks. They tore it down. They turned it into a swimming pool, and then and now we got the real cathedral back.
Exactly, and it's been rebuilt, and it's there. So I mean, they have a completely different perspective of this. Of course, if you go to Ukraine, there it's different. There they have tried to knock down all the Soviet symbols. But in Russia itself, they said, this is a part of our past. We will preserve it. And it's totally different to what the Bolsheviks did. And of course, it's totally different to what some people in the United States are trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Bald and Bankrupt, the YouTuber that travels around the CIS countries, the ex-Soviet countries. It's great to watch him because he actually uncovers all of these old Soviet monuments and mosaics and statues. And it's just really interesting because you get a sense of the history that happened. And it's not such a distant history either. No, it is a reminder of what can happen to a country if you go down the wrong path. Yeah. All right. Lucy Lou, drink water, $10 super chat. Thank you very much, Lucy Lou. Vladimir says, do you agree that West considered Russia going soft on things as a weakness, and as a result, Russia needs to push back in a hard way?
It's not just Putin who thinks that, and most Russians think that. In my experience, I mean, there is a widespread feeling in Russia that, as I said, the West interpreted Russian moves, especially in the 1980s under Gorbachev, attempts by Russia to open up as a sign of weakness, and that they just made use of that. So now the Russians feel that the time has come to actually push back and be tough. And one of the most interesting, and I think for some people in the West, not so much in the US, but in Europe, unnerving things is that over the last year especially, the Russians have been hardening their positions on practically every front. So they're taking harder lines on Ukraine, on economics, on, well, you name it, on pretty much everything. And it's partly, I think, because they feel more confident. They feel that they've overcome their dependence, their economic dependence on the West, but also undoubtedly it's because of this great growth in Russian military power that has been taking place over the last 10 to 7 years.
All right. William Poole says, Syria is getting 2 hours of electricity per day. Food is spoiling, high temperatures. People are starting to get angry with the government. When will the U.S. leave? Well, that's the point. People angry at the government. Yeah. Well,
that is the point. That is exactly what as I understand it. Actually, it's ticking. Ticking along. I mean, Syria is not in quite the state of total collapse that some claims suggest. I mean, there isn't outright famine there, for example, which I sort of suggested. But obviously, it is under intense economic siege. And in some ways, it's an incredibly callous and cynical policy, because everything that was done to try and destabilize and destroy the country, the wars, the arming of jihadi groups, the establishment of bases, the threats of no-fly zones, all that failed. So when that fails, what you next do, you try to suffocate the country economically. And you do that by imposing these drastic sanctions upon them. And in a way, it punishes the people. Well, it doesn't in a way at all. What it does is it takes the anger out on your failure. It takes the anger out on the people of that country itself. I don't think it's going to lead to an uprising against the Syrian government, because, of course, there's already been an uprising against the Syrian government, and that completely failed. So I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I do think that this is something that this will create growing suffering amongst the people there.
Yeah. All right. Miguel says, here in Puerto Rico, we are having electricity problems as well. Mm. I'm really interested in Puerto Rico, Miguel. Is it really a crypto haven? Are a lot of people moving to Puerto Rico for the crypto opportunities? I'm really interested in that, because I'm hearing a lot about Americans who are relocating to Puerto Rico because of their crypto tax laws. Very interesting stuff coming out of Puerto Rico. Let's see. Oh, we lost Alexander. Yeah, we lost Alexander. Let me send him a message, guys. One sec. Alexander is gone, and Alexander is back.
what happened was my Mac got disconnected. So from the you can
I was just about to send you a message right now.
No. It was somehow I was the plug got pulled out of the socket,
right.
and there we go.
You're back. Darren wants to know: do you two ever get tired of gushing on Russia and China?
No, well, we don't
get tired of gushing on Russia. Do we ever get tired of gushing?
We don't get tired of gushing on Russia and China, because we don't gush on Russia and China. I mean, I've been to China. I've seen it there. I see what the kind of place is like, and as I said, I have many criticisms to make of it. And as to Russia, well, I've lived. I haven't lived there, but I mean, again, I've been there. I've been many times, and I know a lot about the place. The fact is, we talk about Russia and China because the US is obsessed with it. I mean, it is part of. They are both part of the international system, and we find ourselves in a situation where the United States is in confrontation with both in one form or another, and that obliges us, or requires us, if you like, when we do a geopolitical and international affairs blog, to talk about them. And that means also discussing both their strengths and their weaknesses. And we talk about their weaknesses, but of course we often have to talk about their strengths, because in the West, those strengths are not recognized. And that's what creates the problem.
I love it. Lucille is saying, I don't know if these are trolls or not, but Lucille's saying, sure, blame your obsession on the US. We have a Russia and China obsession now. We once had a Trump obsession, but now I guess it's a Russia and China obsession. Yeah. We just call it like it is, guys. We're just trying to call it like it is. Are we perfect? No. But we're just trying to call it like it is. And we know the regions, we know the areas, and they're big geopolitical players.
Yeah, I mean,
when we like Trump, we're criticized. When we say something good about Russia, we're criticized. When we do reports on China, we're kind of tough on China. I think
we are on balance.
We're tough on China. I think in general, we're not going crazy over it. We're not like
some
obsessed
people
with it, but we just try to call it like it is. Lucille.
I mean, if
it's an obsession, so be it. But our obsession is for the truth.
I mean, I was going to say, I mean, also, I mean, until a fairly short time ago, I mean, I think if you look at our overall coverage on the Duran, most of it has been more about the US than about any other country. I mean, it really has been. I mean, we've been trying to chart the politics of it. But if you want to talk about obsession, look at Russiagate. If wasn't that an obsession? I mean, there are some people who are obsessed with China and Russia. They're not us.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm answering these questions for the live stream. Anyway, we're having fun. Nunez says, you're right. Russia is badly propagandized against, but every third video having a picture of Putin gets weird. Who do you want us to put a picture of? Who do you suggest? Mishutin? Medvedev? Who do you want us to put a picture of?
Yeah.
We put a picture of Trump. We put pictures of Biden. We put pictures of Putin, of Xi.
Yeah.
Do you want us to put pictures of the transport secretary or the finance minister? I mean, in Greece, I put pictures of Mitsotakis. If I started to put pictures of anybody else, I don't think anyone would recognize these people.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the fact of the matter is, as I said, there are at the moment three great powers, three great military powers: the United States, China, and Russia. We are a geopolitical international relations channel. So we have to cover them. We also do cover, or have tried to cover extensively, US domestic politics, but that has obviously run into all kinds of constraints, which were not of our making. It is not easy to talk about the United States.
Yeah, I know we're being trolled. It's all right. Sometimes it's fun to feed the trolls.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't have anything against feeding the trolls.
No.
We need trolls in the world too.
Absolutely.
They keep things moving.
They do indeed.
Let's see. Let me go back to the super chats. Virtual is Trust says, good morning, Alexander. $5 super chat. Hunger says, the Lebanese currency hit 18,000 lira per 1 USD. Losing 95% of its value in 2 years. No white pills here, just more evidence that oligarchy is incapable of change and the hardest system to get rid of. Good statement.
So profoundly true. Lebanon is a tragic story, and you're absolutely right to put the finger on oligarchy, because the country has been plundered largely by its own domestic oligarchs, by the way, and at the same time these people retain control over it and seem to make any change or reform in Lebanon impossible. And frankly, the figures you've just put about the performance of the Lebanese lira, I thought they were even worse. I actually thought the situation was even worse than those suggest. Certainly the country is in effective hyperinflation.
Yeah. Nunya says, I'm no way trolling you. I've been subscribed for over a year. We appreciate that, Nunya. No, we're just having fun. Thank you for your support. We really appreciate it. Where am I? Rich says, hey guys, what's your opinion on the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset influencing global leaders and their goals and plans? Klaus Schwab, the WEF. We've done videos.
We've done many videos about, we've done very
I don't know if they're still up, but
I mean, that's another. I mean, you know, we would be doing an awful lot more about these sort of things if we could. But of course, I mean, the fact of the matter is, Davos exists. The World Economic Forum exists. Klaus Schwab most definitely does exist. He has all the ideas that people talk about. I mean, he does. If you read them, he has these ideas, and the people in Davos exercise huge influence. I mean, they exercise influence on governments. I mean, leaders of countries. Xi Jinping comes along and talks to Davos. So do, presidents and secretaries of state and foreign ministers and prime ministers. It's the place everybody comes to, and they talk and they meet and they plan. Of course they do. And they organize and they come up with these grand ideas. And they're, in my opinion, utopian. They're unrealistic. They're authoritarian, they will fail, and they do enormous harm. Now, I could say an awful lot more than that, but if I did, I suspect some people would say, this isn't a program. This is a program about theories which we don't really want to see floating.
They're out there. You said it perfectly. The World Economic Forum is not hiding anything. They've published everything on there. It's just it's incredible. I mean, you could read it, you could see it, but still people, say that you're a conspiracy theorist, or you can't speak about it on YouTube. But it's there. It's there on their website. Everything. Yeah. They telegraph everything that they're about. There's no secrets from them.
No, I mean, Klaus Schwab, give him credit where he's due. He's very productive. He writes lots of things. I mean, he's all over the place. If you want to read what he says and what he thinks and where he wants the world to go, it's not difficult to find.
It's so bizarre. They publish these things. Sometimes they even publish books, but you can't talk about them in the public square. Isn't that weird? They can publish everything they're about, or they're doing, or they're thinking of doing, but you can't talk about what they've already published. Exactly.
Unless, of course, you're Justin Trudeau and you agree with it. and you agree with it.
Yeah.
As he does.
Right. Miguel wants to know, can Africa, Latin America become real players or forever proxy actors?
No, it's a very good question. Of course they can. I mean, they have a long way to go. They have much to do. But of course they can. They have all the potential, all the resources to make that possible. It's a question always of political organization and political will. But there is nothing that says that Latin America and Africa couldn't organize themselves. But they have profound structural problems within their own societies. And unless and until those are addressed, then they will be vulnerable to interference and exploitation by powerful outsiders.
Yeah. Let me go back to the super chat here. Alexander from ALQK says, I'm here for the peace and no war. Love the Duran. Thank you very much for that. From Fair super chat, Philippines is pushed towards partnership with the U.S. because of high Chinese presence in sea disputes. Why did China not build a better economic relationship with the Philippines?
Why, indeed. I completely agree. Again, I mean, you want to talk about China again. I mean, the Chinese have completely mismanaged their relations with the Philippines. I think that the president of the Philippines, Duterte, whatever you may think of him, he was not out to be an enemy of China, but the Chinese have pushed so hard against the Philippines, sending fishing fleets and being, frankly, very, very aggressive with their base construction and all of this, that of course is pushing the Philippines into alliance with the United States. The Chinese can get things badly wrong, and this is an example of where they have.
Yeah. From Shifu says Carlos Schwab is Otto von Bismarck of today's age. They are carving up the new era this time, not Africa.
Bismarck was a political leader of tremendous realism. He was tough-minded. He saw the world as it was, and he was extremely careful always to act within the constraints of the power of Prussian power and of German power. Klaus Schwab is not a realist. He is a utopian. Now, of course, he is a very brilliant utopian in his own way, in the sense that he's extremely clever at persuading other people to share his vision. But he is not a statesman in the way that Bismarck was. And where Bismarck succeeded, Klaus Schwab will fail. Of that I am sure.
Hamid wants to know, how about the U.S. withdrawal from Bagram today and Pakistan openly throwing their weight behind China on CPC 100-year anniversary celebrations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to say about Pakistan, first of all, is that Pakistan has been an ally of China for a very long time. I mean, it's an alliance that goes back to the 60s, I think. So that's nothing new there. So I think we shouldn't make too much of that. But in terms of the US withdrawing from Bagram, that is a big event. Afghanistan is it's difficult to see exactly where this is going, because at one level, at a public level, the US has decided to withdraw. It's pulling its troops out. It's pulling its troops out of Bagram, which is the big air base and where the center of US forces. At the same time, we learned that there are discussions about trying to keep some kind of military or special forces presence in Afghanistan after the pullout, and there seems to be some attempts to try to build up this so-called Northern Alliance or reconstruct this Northern Alliance. This is an anti-Taliban grouping of militias drawn from the ethnic groups of the north of Afghanistan. So there are these tensions, but obviously the pullout from Bagram is a big public move. We will see whether it is in fact the actual move that is being made. What we discover so often is that things that happen in public are often contradicted by things that are made in secret, and that it's sometimes the things that are made in secret that really matter.
Yeah. Fucking Nasty wants to know, does structural problems mean if African leaders don't follow script, they disappear?
Yes. I mean, sometimes. I mean, look at the history of coups in Africa. I mean, it's the place in the world where military coups, for example, still happen on a regular and frequent basis. They're so common in Africa that when they happen, they barely register as international news. So, I mean, there has been a long history of political assassinations and removals and disappearances in Africa. So, yes, I mean, can I always say, I mean, for a country to prosper and to succeed, the most important thing it needs are stable and functional political institutions. The basis of US power, the reason the United States became a superpower, and for a time even, the dominant world superpower, was not the things that many people say, the size of its territory, its huge resources, its wealth, and all the rest. All of those came about because of the stability of America's political institutions. The fact that the US government was extremely very strong, had the support of the American people who participated in it. I mean, that was America's secret. And one of the most worrying things for me, in fact, by far the single biggest and most important and worrying thing today, is that stability is now being undermined as never before. Africa has never achieved, and no place in Africa has ever achieved since independence, that level of stability. If Africa can achieve it, if African states can achieve it, then they will take off. But until they do, we will certainly see disappearances and worse things going on across Africa, and it will continue to remain a place with many problems.
All right. Rocky Lux, 20-euro super chat, says, after the 2020 election, I saw several videos showing votes being switched from Trump to Biden on live election broadcasts, and these videos have disappeared. Did the Duran see these videos, and do the claims have merit?
Yes and yes. That's all I can say.
We've had similar things happen to some of our videos.
Yeah.
Not that we had video evidence, but commentary.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Where are we here? Raphael says, guys, your show is special and unique. There's nothing else like it. Are you guys not afraid that the BBC will steal this format? Please protect yourself.
I don't think the BBC has the capacity to steal our format, if I have to be straightforward about it. I mean, don't forget, I basically stopped watching the BBC, but whilst I was at the Lake District, I actually did. I switched on and I watched the BBC News, and I was just astonished at how juvenile and uninformative it's become, actually.
The BBC.
The BBC, well, absolutely, yeah.
What a shame.
Mm.
What a shame. Kurt Fram says, the West has tried to change China for years, but now it's like the Chinese managed to change the West through the WHO, IMF, etc. Any comments?
Absolutely. I think this is true. I mean, this is a point we need to instead of talking about great resets and all these nightmares that are being hatched by people in Davos. What we need to do is to set up a proper system, a proper international system in which countries, nations, states actually look after themselves. If you actually read Xi Jinping's speech, he's all about, how China won't be pushed around, how it won't be dictated to, how it won't have its own systems, decided for it by other people. And we need to do the same in the West. We can't have a situation where the Chinese are doing to us that which they no longer tolerate us doing to them. That would be outrageous. That would be completely unbalanced. And yes, the Chinese are getting enormous influence over so-called international institutions. But of course, they shouldn't own them any more than we should. And we should, each of us, work hard to preserve our own independence and our own states and make sure that, we control our own destinies, not have our decisions made for us by people in Beijing. That's almost, I find it strange, actually, that I find sometimes that, we have to discuss or explain these things. Obviously, we should be doing these things. And yes, the Chinese, because of their power, are now accumulating this level of influence. We need to contain that, control that, but we also need to be aware of what our own interests and what our own power can achieve, which may not be as overarching as some people in Davos would like it to be.
Yeah. Sergio says, the BBC can't stand the truth. Don't worry, guys. You're safe.
Absolutely. I so agree. I used to every morning, I'm talking a long time ago, I used to get up and listen to the BBC World Service. That was where I got my news from. Well, today, forget that.
Dilwyn says the BBC is for football and rugby. That's it.
Pretty much.
Alan says the BBC is destroyed by the EU and woke middle class. They hate working Englishmen.
Totally agree with all of that. Completely agree.
Oh boy, the BBC. Utnosen says, to prevent the triumph of globalism, I believe the West only needs to reconquer US and EU countries. That is itself. It may sound counterintuitive, but it seems to me we are now in the 90s reversed.
I don't think that is counterintuitive. I think it is completely true. We need to regain our democracies. That seems to me obvious. By the way, that is our major strength. As I said, chasing China's GDP growth isn't the way to achieve this. Rebuilding our democratic institutions, that's the way to achieve it. If we do that, and democratic institutions are very bound up with our states. If you're organized in a state with a democratic constitution, a political system, and a rule of law, and all of that, that is a viable system. If you start giving it all away to other non-state, unaccountable institutions, you will undermine your own political stability and your own democracy. This is my own personal view. And that's what we're losing, and that's what we need to regain. Otherwise, if there is going to be a great battle of ideas, we will lose.
What's super chat from Hakon? What's your opinion on Alexander Dugin and his fourth political theory? Have a good weekend, and God bless from Norway.
Thank you very much. Well, I read the Fourth Politicals. It's the only book of Dugin's I've read, and I found it extraordinarily brilliant in parts and absolutely nonsensical in others, like a lot of Dugin's work. He's clearly a clever man. I don't think much. I don't think he offers any kind of way forward. I mean, he's one of those people who's very good at criticizing, very poor at putting things in its place. Go on.
Can I make a comment about Dugin and see your take on it? He's one of those people that's too smart for his own good. You know what I mean? He's too smart. Yeah. He's too brilliant, and sometimes it just gets, the ideas just kind of get lost.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, that's entirely right. I mean, he is, dare I say it, a Russian intellectual, with all that implies. I mean, completely detached from much of reality, often very brilliant, often very insightful. And at the same time, as I said, there is no practical full route forward there. He talks about a fourth political theory. This is to replace capitalism, communism, liberalism, communism and fascism, but he gives no indication of what this fourth political theory is meant to be, and to the extent that he does offer anything, it's completely unworkable, and it's not based upon the lives of real people. This is what I think, and that reflects his real importance in Russia, which is very minimal. I mean, this is a thing people, again, I don't think understand. He's not someone who politically is taken very seriously there. He's taken far more seriously in the West than he is in Russia itself. So, you know, in some ways, I mean, some of his criticisms of the West, especially, and liberalism especially, are very insightful. But I don't think he is, you know, the great intellectual either threat or profit that some people think. I think that he is a vastly overestimated figure. That's my own personal view. And too clever by half, to use the British expression, which is essentially what Alex is saying. He's absolutely spot on. He's so full of his own brilliance and intelligence and cleverness and incisiveness that, as I said, ultimately he can't sit down and be practical and come up with any practical kind of program.
Yeah. From Sean Wookie says, at Rocky Lux, there is merit. I saw those issues myself. No explanation offered would fit. Evidence soon at Cyber Symposium via Lindell and crew. That goes back to the
I know what it is. Again, I mean, we have to be so careful what we say. I mean,
yes.
But yes. I mean, you know, we and thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are spot on. I mean, spot on. Yeah. Kurt Fram, Alexander looks younger, new haircut and all. I think his vacation was good for him, right?
It was.
Was your vacation good for you?
Oh, absolutely. Very much so. I'm glad to say I lost some weight, which is always a good thing. And so did my dogs, by the way.
All right, cool. Let's see. Is Sandy, do you think international travel will ever recover? Will the COOF lockdown become a climate lockdown? Will shot status be linked to our personal carbon allowance, restricting travel permanently?
I'm going to express my view. I think there are some people who are probably who want us to head very much in the direction that you say. I think there are, but I think ultimately, again, the human desire to move, to travel around, to live normal lives will prevail. It always does in the end. You can't keep things tightly controlled in that kind of way indefinitely. But, again, to be absolutely clear, there are people who do think in that way. I mean, I read them. Again, the remarkable thing about this is, again, this is done in open sight. You read all this stuff that's written by people like that, and they do talk about the need, to cut down air travel or travel because that's necessary to protect the climate. So, I mean, those agendas do exist, but as I said, ultimately, I'm convinced they will fail.
Yeah, but. Yeah, to answer your question, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes,
absolutely, yes,
and yes on all your. Yes. That's the plan. But,
absolutely, yeah.
Will we let them get away with it? That remains to be seen. I mean, you say no over time. Yeah, eventually you say no. But
I mean,
could it be a rough 2, 3, 4, 5? We talked about the Soviet Union, 70 years. Could it be?
Or even longer? I was going to say. I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, there could be a very difficult time in the future. But as I said, in the end, ultimately, it will fail. Even the Berlin Wall came down in the end.
Yeah, I mean, time goes by quickly, guys. I mean, 1.5 years we've been at it, and we talked about Australia. Australia has been in a heavy lockdown, heavy restrictions now for 6 months to a year. I don't know. Someone in Australia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, it's just been forever, it seems. Time goes by. And like I said, we talked about the Soviet Union, and which started as a Bolshevik revolution, turned into a 70-year, Soviet government. 70 years.
Yeah.
So we need to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Of course we do.
Where am I here? Sparky, contractors and foreign intel are increasingly used to circumvent U.S. law and fool the public concerning foreign policy, military, health, and privacy. That goes along the lines of what we said.
Absolutely true. It's completely right. I mean, there are so many provisions of U.S. law that are no longer operative in any meaningful sense. I mean, due process, certainly in political cases in the United States, has all but collapsed. I still find the Michael Flynn business absolutely horrifying, actually, but that's an example. But if you're talking about foreign policy and the conduct of US foreign policy, well, what about that provision of the Constitution that, it is Congress that has the sole right to declare war? How many times has the United States been at war since the last time it declared war, which was in 1941? I mean, it goes on all the time. I mean, that provision of the US Constitution is de facto abolished.
Yeah. A Straight Arrow says Australia is reverting to its penal colony past. Coco is saying only Melbourne has had heavy lockdowns for that long. And Pete's video says rolling lockdowns in Australia.
I know, but I mean, but it's still people are still having a lot, very tough time there. No question.
Yeah. Where am I, Alexander? Let me get back to the questions here. From Neil, Manhattan DA found nothing on Trump Inc. finances this morning. When will the militant Dems ever learn? Love you guys. The charges were released. I don't know if you had a look at them.
I did have a look at them.
Nothing burger is what comes to my mind.
Exactly. I mean, we've done a program about this. I mean, and the point made that in the end, this is all about Trump, and yet the end it ended up with nothing about Trump. It tells its own story. These are political prosecutions or political investigations, or at least politically driven prosecutions and investigations. There's clearly a desire to try and find something, anything that you can attach to Trump to prevent his return. And the remarkable thing is that they're coming up with nothing. It's quite extraordinary, actually. It's something I would not have expected. I said it many times, I'm going to say it again. I would have thought that somebody whose major business is that the construction and hotel industries would have at least something, some skeleton hiding somewhere. But by now, after, 7 years? And they've come up with nothing, can only mean that there isn't anything there. And the Democrats will never learn that. They will go on looking, and they'll still be looking for 20, 30 years from now, if Donald Trump is still alive, which presumably he won't be because he's already in his 70s. But anyway, but they will go on looking until they think they found something, even though always it will turn out that what they're looking for doesn't exist.
The full power of the surveillance state. They threw everything at him, and they came up with the CFO doing some tax funny business.
Absolutely. And bear in mind, we're not talking about any surveillance state. We're talking about the surveillance state of the United States of America, the mightiest intelligence community in the world, and law enforcement community in the world. And they've come up with nothing. So if you repeatedly come up with nothing, a reasonable person eventually says, well, that must mean that there is nothing there. And they stop. But these people will never stop because that's not something they will ever accept.
And if the CFO broke the law or he did some stuff that was illegal, then fine.
Absolutely.
Try him, and whatever the judgment is, it is. But it's not anything that's unusual in when you're dealing with these big multinational, massive corporations. I'm sure if you put the same type of scrutiny on Facebook and Google and Tesla and Apple and Amazon, you could come up with the same exact instances. I'm positive of it.
That is true, but I would quickly add that it is a fundamental principle of human rights law, which is that the criminal law should never be used for purposes of political persecution and for politically motivated prosecutions. Such prosecutions are an abhorrence, and selective prosecutions, in other words, going after one person because you consider them to be a political target and ignoring similar malpractice by other people, is also abhorrent under human rights law. So it's important to bear those things in mind. And I would add that all human rights law originates in the United States of America.
Yeah, I would be very curious to crack the books open for the Clinton Foundation and see what we can find there as well.
Well, indeed.
No doubt about it.
Well, indeed.
I mean, it is what it is. What it is, guys. Yeah.
Well, I mean, all I would say about that, of course, is that when Hillary Clinton was investigated, the director of the FBI and his associates went to extraordinary length to come up with all kinds of explanations for why she wouldn't be prosecuted, which they had to change repeatedly because words that they used, in fact, pointed to reasons why she ought to have been prosecuted. So there is a certain difference.
And they still got mad at Comey after he covered for her. They still got upset with Comey. Absolutely. And they blamed him for the election results.
Absolutely.
After he went well out of his way to cover for her.
Absolutely.
Oh, boy. All right. Colette said that lockdowns in Ireland have not stopped. I heard lockdowns in Ireland are pretty strict, and they've been going on for a while.
Yeah. I've heard the same.
So, yeah. What can we say? Reckless Abandon says Melbourne is not in lockdown now.
No.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good. Let's hope it remains open. Leon says Alexander should not have worked on vacation, but I'm sure we are all grateful for it.
Well, we're a small, hard-working firm, company, business channel, and of course, we work on vacation. By the way, it's fun to do. It's something that we enjoy doing. So the great thing about going to the Lake District is, of course, it gets you away from London. It gives you an opportunity to exercise in the open air, to see beautiful landscapes, to see lakes and mountains, well, hills mainly, not really mountains. We don't really have mountains in England. So it was still a wonderful break. And I feel greatly rested and improved for it.
Yeah. Susan says Ireland is the NWO experiment. Yeah, I learned a lot about Ireland from computing forever. David Cullen, his BitChute Nazi channel. He does a great job in reporting on what's going on in Ireland. It looks crazy what's going on there. It really does. Kurt Fram says 130 plus countries signed the global 15% company tax. What kind of pressure will be applied to the countries who did not? Hungary, Estonia, and Ireland. Alexander's talking about Ireland. There you go, the 15% tax.
Well, there you go. I mean, this is. Can I just say, it's a stupid idea, and we've been doing programs. We started doing programs with Robert Barnes, who was a tax expert, and he said that this can only be made to work if you establish a global digital currency, which I must admit made my ears prick up, and get everybody to accept this global digital currency. So, and this is something that he really understands. So it looks as if this isn't just a device to get the Democrats through their tax problems, because of course they're increasing taxes in the United States. It looks as if there might be another agenda behind it too, which is not that removed from the Davos one that we were talking about before. So to answer the question again, there is going to be enormous pressure on all of these countries to accede to this. But again, in the end, it won't succeed, because there will be big countries that won't go along with it. I mean, China, India, Russia will not go along with it.
Yeah. Well, the West will, though.
The West will.
The West will, and that's why they want the central bank digital currencies so badly.
Exactly. So ask yourself why, in that case, the West is losing competitiveness. Because it is. I mean, it's because it's doing these sort of things. This is the paradox of globalization. The more they drive it forward, the more in the end they weaken them, and weaken themselves, or rather weaken the West in its competition with its rivals. Because you're not going to get the Chinese to do something like this.
From Basha, 4.99 super chat. If you want to know the angle the BBC will take on any story, check the BBC charity and see whether key figures in the story have made large donations. That's an interesting point.
Well,
very interesting point. Yeah. Leon says, I can't believe the degree to which Trump and those who supported him have been persecuted. I keep waiting to wake up from this.
Absolutely. I mean, you haven't seen anything like this in the United States before. I've never. I mean, at least not to my memory. I mean, it is quite extraordinary to see that something like this happen in the United States. And I wonder how long it can go on for, and how much damage it's doing along the way. I mean, this is worse, much worse than the so-called McCarthyite witch hunts of the 50s. I mean, there's no comparison, in my opinion.
And it's not going to end. No,
I think it's getting worse at the moment.
Alexander, yeah, go ahead.
And it seems to me that especially with if there are growing economic problems in the United States and a possibility of a revival of the Trump movement, it'll escalate even more.
Your thoughts on the NSA spying of Tucker Carlson?
Well, I mean, again, outrageous,
alleged,
and illegal, completely illegal if it is true. And when I say illegal, I mean unconstitutionally illegal.
No denial.
No denial
has been given.
No. Yeah.
They used a lot of legal speak, but they didn't deny it.
No. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh boy. Okay, so we got the super chats. Let me go into the live stream, and we'll get some more questions, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
So let's see what people are saying in the live stream. Let's see if there's some good questions that we can talk about here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tucker Carlson, he's really getting under their skin. He has a huge audience. That's why.
Of course he does.
And he touches topics which, a lot of mainstream journalists will not touch.
No. I mean, whatever happened to the liberal principle that, I may disagree with you, but I may disagree with you profoundly, but I will fight to the death for your right to say what you said. Which is what Voltaire said.
Traditional liberals don't exist anymore.
Well, exactly. No.
I don't think they exist anymore.
Of course not.
Yeah.
I've never known people who call themselves liberals be so authoritarian? I mean, it's the most authoritarian movement I have seen, contemporary liberalism, authoritarian movement I've seen in the West, or could have ever imagined.
Yeah. Igor says, Pat Buchanan had it right. Republic or an empire. If you choose an empire, it will end as all others, except this empire is headed to be the shortest lived.
He is profoundly right. And can I just say, one of the reasons it is so short-lived is because it is by definition dysfunctional, because it's an attempt to graft an empire onto a country which was built on republican and democratic traditions. So there's a fundamental mismatch between the two. That's why so much of it has to be done in secret, with all this extraordinary amount of dissonance going on. And that's again, come back to Chinese. The Chinese can be absolutely straightforward about what they're doing. They can talk very openly with each other because, they don't have that. They don't come from that place. And
Exactly.
Whereas the US has to constantly pretend to itself that it's doing the opposite of what it is really doing, because it's going against its own nature. And that's the problem.
Yeah. China's congruent. I agree with you on that for the most part. I mean, that's why when, you sit there and you talk about their social credit score and their surveillance, to me, it's okay. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
They don't hide the fact. We know the government, how it works, how it operates.
Yeah.
And the social credit score, that surveillance system, is perfectly congruent with where they want to go as a government. I mean, but the US and the EU and all of Europe doing this is just no, thank you. That's not what you promised me. That's not the deal.
Exactly.
I'm a citizen here, and we made a deal as to how I'm going to live, and I'm going to pay my taxes and what you're going to give me. The surveillance and all this other stuff was not part of the deal. So no, thank you. All right. Will the Republic of Ireland leave the EU? From Alison.
I would have
maybe the EU will leave first. We'll break up first.
Once upon a time, and when I say once upon a time, I mean a year ago, asking that question would have produced almost risible laughter, because the island seemed to be absolutely integrated within the EU's structures and was doing incredibly well through them. Well, at least, not always well. I mean, there was that awful period in the early 2010s when it was one of the PIIGSs, the so-called pigs. But overall, the Irish have been very committed to the EU. I think for the first time, they're starting to see some of the problems. And of course, the way that Brexit is playing out is starting to affect Ireland too. And I think they're realizing that the EU is using them. It's using them to try.
The government or the people?
Well, it's using the country to try.
Who realizes that the EU is using
the
government
people
or
the people are. I mean, I don't think the government. I think the government is completely part of the EU structures and will remain so for the foreseeable future. But I think for the first time, you're starting to see a pushback amongst some Irish people against the EU, and the way the EU is trying to use Ireland as a kind of battering ram against Britain.
Is there an equivalent in Ireland to, say, like the Nigel Farages or these types of political leaders or movements? Is there something equivalent?
Not that I know of, but I would not be surprised if something like that emerges. After all, the Irish have a long history of fighting for their independence, and of course, there's the Republican tradition in Ireland, which I would have thought was not actually very congruent, to use your word, with the EU structures either. So I could quite easily imagine at some point something emerging out of that. But at the moment, I don't know anything like it.
All right. Sentinel, a £50 super chat. You look well rested, Alexander. Good to see you. Love your channel, guys. Keep it up. Thank you very much for that super chat. We appreciate it. From Mona Turkia says, 100 and OK says, the pulling out of Afghanistan, is it to build up for a bigger war somewhere else?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, what it's all about. I mean, what it was all about, I think, was the United States pulling back from the Middle East, from Afghanistan, and all the rest, and focusing on China instead. That was the original thing that we heard about. But I think we're gradually seeing that change, and I think what we're seeing is a renewed emphasis on the Middle East, and this is where I find. This is where I sometimes find the neocons very difficult to understand, because this obsession with the Middle East, which they've led the US into over the last 20 years, has been utterly destructive of US power. It means that you're getting, lost in the quicksand of the Middle East. Even as China grows ever stronger. And that, I have to say, I find very, very, very bizarre and very strange. But all the movements at the moment are for the neocons to try to involve the US again in challenges in the Middle East. And again, I did a program on my channel recently about how there's a new neocon group which is now openly advocating regime change in Turkey, with all the old cliches and language about, how Turkey needs change because it's becoming repressive, authoritarian, all of which is true, by the way, but I mean, not from the kind of perspective the neocons want. So I mean, so it's bizarre to see how these people seem still stuck on those same tram lines.
Tim Fronimus, Ireland won't leave the EU until it gets a statesman leader.
Well, true. Said. So true. Yeah.
Well said.
So same for France, same for Italy. Yeah. Let's see whether anyone appears.
Yep, I agree. Rakesh Kuto, $5 super chat. Thank you very much for that. From Sparky, on average, U.S. baby boomers did an awful job of passing on important culture to our children. We left it up to the schools. That is a very smart statement.
It's a very smart statement. It's also true in Britain, by the way. I mean, the British school system is a very, very disorganized state at the moment. Much better though than the US, from all I hear.
Yeah. Isis Andy says £5 super chat, says Ireland's bought and paid for Pfizer, J&J, and then the EU bank bailout of 2008.
Yeah.
Ireland is now the petri dish for big government, big banks, and big pharma. The key there, Alexander, is the EU bank bailout in 2008.
So true, absolutely.
So
yeah, I agree. But of course, I mean, always one has to say this. A state, a nation can, if it musters up the will, pursue its own course. I mean, one mustn't say that Ireland has to take these lines or follow this approach, but at the moment it is, and that's the reality.
We've done shows on this, though, Alexander, and we'll wrap it up soon. But I mean, we've done many shows. It's extremely difficult for any country that is using the euro currency to get out of the eurozone. Not so much the EU, but the eurozone. It can be done, but it's going to be very difficult. I mean, it's going to have to take a lot of sacrifice.
It can be done. Yeah. It can be done. Can I say? I mean, the moment the EU will collapse is when one country does it. When one country does it and successfully brings back its own currency, overcomes the problems, and recovers. At that point, the whole house of cards will be shown for what it is, a house of cards, and you start to see the pack crumple. But that is the big event. When a country finally screws up the courage to pull out of the euro, then it will all come crashing.
That's using the euro, That's using the euro currency.
Using the euro currency, yeah.
Okay. Neil says, as an Irishman, Ireland is extremely woke and won't leave the EU after taking so much from them in the first place.
Well, yeah.
The loans, the money.
The money,
the
absolutely.
austerity.
Yeah.
That's what's trapped all these countries.
Yes.
And we have one more here from Sparky. There's a J. Edgar Hoover style file on all U.S. citizens and many other developed countries. High technology makes it possible.
Absolutely. And again, this is, I mean, on a scale that J. Edgar Hoover would never have dreamed of. I mean, he had his files, which, you know, all the prominent people in Washington. But I mean, what they can achieve today is on an entirely different level to anything that J. Edgar Hoover, the Stasi in East Germany, the NKVD in Moscow, the people, you know, the security bureaus in China, they would never have been able to come up with anything like what they can do today. And they can get it, they can harvest it also, of course, from you know, which, you know, bear in mind they can get data in all kinds of different ways.
Wow. Which makes the charges against Trump against the Trump organization even more amazing.
Well, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Incredible. Let's see, a couple more. Cool Beyond says EU will collapse unsaved by the Great Reset. That's an interesting take. The Tekusa says if Russia's out of SWIFT, then goes FACTA tax. That's also interesting.
Yeah.
If Russia's out of SWIFT, then you don't have the FACTA bank laws for Americans living in Russia, I would imagine.
Absolutely true. Completely right. I mean, you know, all of this this whole business of SWIFT is so interesting, actually, because there are huge disadvantages for the West in disconnecting Russia from SWIFT, which is why they haven't done it. But they are, I remain convinced that sooner or later it will happen. Either it will happen because the Russians will do something and the West feels it has to respond with sanctions, and that's the only one they have left, basically. Or, and I think this is increasingly likely, the Russians will disconnect from SWIFT themselves.
Yeah. All right. From Tim Fronimus, $20 super chat, Irish Greek American listening from Michigan. Awesome. Thank you very much, Tim, for that. All the best to everyone in Michigan. And the Guitarman, $20 super chat says election audit in AZ in final stages. Report due soon. Major pushes or audits in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, and others. In New York City, the recent election, 150,000 test ballots were counted. MSM is apoplectic about fixing it. Can't make this up. Yeah, I heard about New York. That's
I heard about this too. Yeah, absolutely. I know. Yes, but thanks.
150,000. Yeah, I mean it's, and they're upset with him.
Yeah,
the mainstream media is upset with him, who's a Republican. I mean, who's a Democrat, a liberal.
Yes,
and they're upset with the guy now because he had 150,000 votes stolen from or added on to the competitors.
Yes,
just can't make this stuff up.
No.
Make this stuff up. Okay. Wade sends a $5 super chat. And I think we got everything. Alexander, New York City is a dumpster fire. Yes, it sounds like it.
Do you know something? It's so sad for me because I mean, I know New York and I love New York, or at least I love the New York I remember. I say that because I haven't been there for a very long time. And I used to go to, so I mean, it's very sad to me to hear that all these things going on in New York at the moment. And I still hope that the city I remember will sort itself out in some way.
Yeah. Mark Hewitt says, why has Cressida Dick, the Met police chief, kept her job after the publication of the report on Daniel Morgan?
You asked, I'd love to know this. I'd love to know the answer to that question also. All I can say is this. First of all, in my opinion, she's a completely incompetent police commissioner. I mean, that's my first observation. The second is, I know that there are a lot of people in the police who don't have much respect or time for her at all. And the third thing is that she's a highly political animal. And I suspect that the secret is in that she knows an awful lot of people. She's very well connected, and that keeps her where she is. One of the people I'm sure that she's particularly close to is Sadiq Khan, who's the mayor.
Yeah. And from Basha 499 super chat, the big reset is predicated on the disconnect between national debt and economic reality. We the people are the real and only creditors.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes,
Provided
if people understand that, then, as I said, that then things change. Again, it was a French thinker, I can't remember his name. He once said, once the people begin to reason, all is lost. And the Davos crowd know that perfectly well.
Yeah. And finally, Alexander, we have a great super chat. We'll finish it on this one. From Anne, it says, "Be the sun and all will see you," from Dostoevsky. Thank you for your wonderful videos.
Thank you.
Be the sun and all will see you.
That is amazing.
One of your favorites.
Oh, absolutely.
Authors, yeah. Correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Very true. Yes, he is very much. Especially I went once through a rather hard time. And as I said, he helped me through, as he helps a lot of people.
Dostoevsky, yes. What book do you recommend, real quick, Alexander? If you haven't read Dostoevsky, what's the first book that you recommend?
The Brothers Karamazov, his very last one. The first book of what was, I think, intended to be a series of 4. He only finished the first, but it is great. It is an extraordinary book, and that I think is his greatest book. But the other one that I have a huge respect for is The Idiot. And Mishkin, my dog, is named after Prince Mishkin, Lev Mishkin, who is the major character in The Idiot. And he's not an idiot at all. He's a person who's Christ-like, but people around him see him as an idiot because they are blind and he can see. And for those who are interested in politics, and would like to understand a lot about, some of the things that happened in the United States last year, his most interesting book on politics is Demons. Some call it The Possessed, which is about the emergence of an extreme radical movement in a Russian provincial town, which evolves eventually into a terrorist movement. And it's most extraordinary.
Yeah. Wade sends $5. Thank you very much, Wade, for that. We have Mona, who sent a $19 super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Mona. And we have one more from Nitsewich, which says, "Any idea to which extent Russia is going to work together in regards to space exploration?"
Russia work with with whom together?
I imagine the US or China, I guess, is now in the space race now. I mean,
well, Russia is in a strange situation because, of course, they're working both with the US and with China. But my impression is, because of the political tensions, that cooperation with the US is gradually ebbing, whereas cooperation with China is most definitely rising. I mean, they're talking about building a lunar base together, for example. So that's quite a big thing. But I will say that one institution in the US which has resisted all attempts to break connections with Russia has been NASA. NASA has always worked very well with Roscosmos, which is the Russian equivalent, and they seem to be very anxious to preserve that. And maybe, who knows, maybe they might actually forge a bridge. Who could say? Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll end it there, Alexander. One sec. Sean Wookie sent the $5 super chat. "Lack of communication starts wars. Communication can end wars and is required for cooperation to last."
That is extremely true. That's exactly right. And one of the most disastrous consequences of Russiagate, launched in an utterly frivolous way by Barack Obama and his administration, for purely domestic purposes, which we've discussed many times, is that it brought communication between Moscow and Washington to a point of almost total collapse. Apparently, the only actual line of communication that was left until the Geneva summit was that between the militaries, between the chief of staff in Moscow and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs in Washington. So during the Ukrainian crisis in April, it was those two officials, Milley and Gerasimov, who were actually talking to each other over the phone because there was no one else who could. And that's an astonishing state of affairs.
Okay, let me check the super chats, make sure I got everything. Alexander, real quick, Engine Kid says, "Solzhenitsyn's book, The First Circle, is great."
Yes, it is.
Are you a Solzhenitsyn fan? As I check the super chats here.
Yeah.
Are you? Yeah.
I mean, well, I don't put him on the same level as Dostoevsky, because Dostoevsky also speaks to me in a way that Solzhenitsyn doesn't. But Solzhenitsyn is an extraordinary writer, and First Circle is extraordinary, and Cancer Ward also.
Any other notable Russian writers that you like? As I check the super chats, couple names.
Well, lots of Russian writers. I mean, Bulgakov, who wrote The Master and Margarita, a book which is, by the way, in fact, which people don't realize, it's about Stalin's terror. Well, it's about many things, but one of the things it is about Stalin's terror. I mean, it's set in an apartment where people disappear, and of course, if you actually consider the time when it's been written, which is 1936, you know that the reason people disappeared from apartments was not because, they were vanished away. It was because somebody vanished them away. And there's also references to a building, which is obviously the Lubyanka. So it's a quite extraordinary book. If your taste goes to modernism in literature, then of course you could read St. Petersburg, which is an extraordinary novel. I forget the name of the writer, but it's a kind of Russian Ulysses, but it precedes Ulysses by a couple of years. And then of course you get lots of other Russian novels of the 19th century, Turgenev, Parents and Children, Not Fathers and Sons, as people say, and Turgenev is a great writer, and lots of others. I mean, where to start? Where to start?
Okay.
I'm also a great fan of Chekhov, and I should say something, by the way, that when it comes to Chekhov, the Americans act Chekhov far better than the British do. American productions of Chekhov and films about Chekhov are much better than British ones. The British always gentrify him, and which the Americans have a more innate understanding of what Chekhov's plays are, and short stories. But you can go on YouTube and you can find Russian adaptations of them. A very good film. A very good Russian film of Chekhov is Unfinished Piece for Mechanical Piano, which is actually an adaptation of Platonov, one of Chekhov's early plays. Anyway, I'm going off on
final super chat from English Loyalist, which we've answered this, but have you been following the statue toppling of Queen Victoria and Elizabeth II in Canada? It was both.
So it was both. Well, there you go. I mean, I have. I didn't realize it was both. But I mean, I repeat what I said before. I am against statue toppling. Full stop. I think it's a very bad thing. I think it's a very bad idea. If the Canadians want a republic, by all means, let them have it. Let them go through a proper political process and decide that they want to be a republic. I accept that. But statue toppling is not only pointless, it's not pointless, actually. It's destructive. It tries to raise your historic memory in a way that I think is completely wrong.
Yeah. We'll leave it there. Alexander, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I think, well, first of all, it's been extraordinarily interesting, right? I mean, we've done, I think, more history than we usually do, actually, which is always attractive. I will certainly try and familiarize myself with the works of Professor Sarton. I hope I've got the name correct. If anybody can check and confirm, because I mean, a lot obviously has been looked at about early Soviet history that I'm not really very familiar with. So at least I haven't looked at for a very, very long time. Yeah. So that's something that I would certainly be very interested in finding out more about.
All right, Tolstoy, Pushkin. I'm just going through the live stream and seeing some of the authors mentioned.
Pushkin is an extraordinary writer, but of course he writes a lot of his best work is poetry, and unless you speak Russian, poetry doesn't translate well. He is the most important writer for Russians, by the way. Russians love Tolstoy, and that's an understatement. I mean, he's very much part of their self-definition about themselves. Tolstoy is a genius, and War and Peace is extraordinary, but some of his later books his religious books, which people don't read so much in the West, are extraordinary in themselves. And Resurrection, his last novel, which Western critics dislike, is actually, when you read it, a remarkable novel.
All right. Ernesto says, you guys remained the best team. Is always a huge quality show every time. Thank you very much for this amazing work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for that. We'll end it there, guys. Go check us out on Locals, guys. Check us out on Locals. We're putting up a lot of content there, and a lot of the community is putting up a lot of good content there as well. So please check us out on Locals. Go to Super U, free speech video platform, Super U as well. Of course, we're on Rumble, on BitChute, and on Odyssey. And Duran Shop. A lot of people say they like the hat. You can get one of these, the Duran Shop. This is one with the USA. It's got the USA flag. I see that you've got a shirt with Australia.
Absolutely,
I believe, correct?
Yes. Correct. Absolutely, Australia. You can see it. You can see it there. Definitely Australia. Country, by the way, British people feel a tremendous affection for. So, I mean, it's very sad to hear some of the things people say about Australia's situation today, but we feel very, very close to Australia here.
Locals is like, someone's asking what is Locals? It's like a private Duran community. And videos, it's got videos. Other people in the community can share stuff as well. It's free to access, but there's a paid version as well where you can get, additional access to certain features. But it's pretty cool. And it's our own community, so we can speak freely there as well. Anna Karenina.
Anna Karenina, great novel, absolutely.
Throwing in there.
Yeah, the extraordinary novel. I mean, of course, Dostoevsky thought it was a brilliant novel, by the way. And many people said Anna Karenina is the greatest novel ever written. I would certainly not go that far. I don't think there is such a thing. But it is an extraordinary novel and very remarkable. And if you want to understand also the differences between St. Petersburg and Moscow, it's actually a very important novel for understanding all of that, because you see that there is actually a different culture and different life between the two cities, which was true then and it's still true today.
Yeah, and Alan Tracy will leave it off on your quote from Solzhenitsyn, which says, ownership of the media is always in the hands of the perpetrators.
True.
From Solzhenitsyn.
Well, Solzhenitsyn.
Very smart people. Very smart people, Alexander.
Absolutely.
He tells you, what else did you say, Alan? I was on there. And he tells you what they want you and what they want to do to you. And he tells you what they want to do to you.
True.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Valies, GEC, Zariel, for all the great moderation and the great comments that you guys are putting in the live stream. I'm reading all of the comments from you guys. Thank you very much. And have a great weekend. It is 4th of July on Monday, correct?
Correct.
4th of July on Monday. So have a great 4th of July. Rest up, take care, enjoy the weekend, and everyone else all around the world, enjoy the weekend. We'll be back next week.
Absolutely.
Take care. Hit that like, everybody, on the way out. Bye-bye.